Hello everybody, this video is about skull anatomy, and I'm using the anatomy models from the lab to explain the skull. So let's talk about the bones first, and then the different features of each bone. So this is the frontal bone, parietal bone. Frontal bone is only one. Parietal bone, there are two of them, one on each side, so it's located in the superior lateral part of the skull. Temporal bone is located below the parietal bone. There's two of them, one on each side. Zygomatic is located more anteriorly. It's the cheekbone, so located anteriorly, and also it is two of them. Nasal bone, there's two of them. That's making the bony part of the nasal bridge. Then you have the maxilla, which is this area, but this whole bone is maxilla. So then you have the lacrimal bone. You have the ethmoid bone, so you can see it's located more medially. And the sphenoid bone. So this is the sphenoid bone, and also this is the sphenoid bone. And this is the sphenoid bone. Maxilla, which is the upper jaw. Maxilla, there's two of them. Ethmoid and sphenoid, there is only one of them. Lacrimal, there are two of them. And mandible, which is the lower jaw, just one bone. So if you look at the lateral view, you have the frontal bone against the forehead area, parietal bone, posterior to that, temporal bone below that. You also have the occipital bone, this posterior to the parietal bone and temporal bone. Anteriorly, you have the nasal bone, you have the lacrimal bone, you have the ethmoid, you have the zygomatic, the sphenoid, maxilla from here all the way to here, and this is the mandible. Posterior view, you can see the frontal bone, just a small part of it. Then you have the parietal bone, you can see there are two of them, and the occipital bone, located posteriorly. From the superior view, you have the frontal bone, so part of the frontal bone. You have small part of the ethmoid bone. This area that you see, this whole area is sphenoid, so just one bone. Temporal bone, this is temporal bone, orange color, and this one, so there's two of them. Occipital bone, this light brown, this is the occipital bone. So this area you see it from outside. This is the parietal bone, part of the parietal bone. So sutures, what are sutures? Sutures are connections between two skull bones. The two skull bones are connected with a dense regular connective tissue, and they are immobile. So there is no mobility. They are synarthrosis. Four sutures. One is coronal suture, and this is connecting frontal bone with the parietal bone. This is the coronal suture, also is called frontal suture. Squamous suture. This is the squamous part of the temporal bone, and that connects with the parietal bone. Lambdoid is connecting the occipital bone, which is this one, with the parietal bone. and the sagittal. So you have to look at this superiorly to see it. And this is connecting the two parietal bones. This small part of lambdoid suture is also here. This is the superior view. So orbital cavity, there are two of them, and this is where eyes are located. So these two images are from the same model, it's just a different angle. You have the supraorbital margin, that is part of the frontal bone. You have the supraorbital foramen, also part of the frontal bone. So same thing here. This is the foramen and this is the margin. Infraorbital margin you have here. Infraorbital margin. Or this one. And infraorbital foramen. So this one or this one, this one or this one. Superior orbital fissure. Some nerves pass through that. And inferior orbital fissure. This one. So the nasal cavity. The nasal cavity, the way that you can look at it is like it has two lateral walls, which are these ones. Lateral walls. This is also the lateral wall. It has a septum. The septum, part of it is bony, the other part is cartilage. We are talking about the bone here, so there's no cartilage. And it is made of two different bones. So the upper part is a separate bone and the inferior part is the separate bone. And then you also have this, which is the floor of the nasal cavity. And the floor of the nasal cavity also makes the roof of the mouth. So this is the mouth, it's the roof of the mouth, which also makes the floor of the nasal cavity. So you have the nasal conchae. So conchaes are bony projections on the lateral walls of the nasal cavity. There are three of them on each side. The superior one is very high, so in this model it does not show there. Most lab models don't show the superior one. This is the middle one. So superior and middle one is part of the ethmoid bone, and inferior is a separate bone by itself. So inferior nasal conchae is a separate bone by itself. Perpendicular plate. So this is the upper part of the nasal septum, and this is part of the ethmoid bone. So it's this area. And the vomer. The vomer is a single bone in the sagittal plane. So that makes the lower part of the nasal cavity. So this is vomer. So this is the nasal cavity itself, and because of the septum is made of the right and left nasal cavities, and this is the anterior part of it, and this is the posterior part of it. And the maxilla is making the floor of the nasal cavity. So this area are the roof of the mouth, same thing. So the skull from superior view, you can see part of the frontal bone here. You have a couple of anatomical structures of the ethmoid bone. And this is called crista galli. So it's a bony prominence perpendicular to the cribriform plate. So this thing that you see here and this that you see here This is called cribriform plate, and crista galli is perpendicular on top of that. And cribriform plate has small holes in it, and cranial nerve 1 passed through that. And then you have the sphenoid. Okay, so these other structures that I'm talking about here is the sphenoid bone. So the sphenoid bone starts from here, goes like this, and comes like that. Okay, so this is sphenoid bone. Sphenoid bone has lesser wings. There's 2 of them. The greater wings. Optic canal. Just posterior to that is sella turcica, or hypophyseal fossa is another name. And then you have the 3 fossae are here on each side. So foramen rotundum, foramen ovalis is the bigger one, and foramen ospinosum, so the smaller one, 3 of them. These 3 fossae, they are part of the sphenoid. So from here to here, they're all part of the sphenoid. These 2 are part of the ethmoid. You have in the middle is foramen lacerum. Foramen lacerum is located between 3 different bones. Okay, so this is the sphenoid bone, this is the temporal bone, and this is the occipital bone. So in between the 3 bones. Internal acoustic meatus, a little bit difficult to see. So in this view, you have to have a side view to see it, but this is the area. And jugular foramen. So if you find jugular foramen, which is really big, and if you look up, you will find the internal acoustic meatus. Foramen magnum, really big. And inside, you have to find a hypoglossal foramen inside the foramen magnum. Internal occipital crest is this area. The inferior view. So there's 2 things here in the roof of the mouth or floor of the nasal cavity. So this image is a little bit clearer. So one is called the palatine process. This belongs to maxilla. So this is located anteriorly. This is palatine process of maxilla. This is the palatine process of maxilla. Posterior to that, you have the palatine bone itself, which is a smaller bone. So the floor of the nasal cavity or the roof of the mouth is made of 2 different bones. One is the palatine process of maxilla anteriorly, and the palatine bone itself, palatine bone, that's posteriorly. You have the nasal septum here. You can see the nasal septum here, part of the nasal cavity, so the posterior part of the nasal cavity. This is the pterygoid processes and plates. This is part of the sphenoid. Then we have the temporal bone. So this is a stylus process. You can see it's really sharp. Mastoid process, which is round, just behind your ears. Again, foramen magnum, and you can see part of the hypoglossal canal here. External occipital crest, and the protuberance, external occipital protuberance. This is just a different angle, so you can see again here, by the way, this is mandible, so it is partially obstructing the view of the hard palate. So this is the palatine process of maxilla, as I explained it before, and this is the palatine bone. This is the pterygoid processes and plates, these two. And you can see the foramina here in this view better, so that's why I put this image. So you can have the foramen lacerum, so it's in the middle. Then you can see the foramen ovale, and you can see foramen rotundum. Sorry, foramen spinosum. Rotundum is here, it's difficult to see. So foramen spinosum is easier, so rotundum is around this area. And then you have the stylite process, but you could see that better in the previous image. And you have the mastoid process, foramen magnum again, and the occipital condyle that articulates with C1. Now some individual bones, some features that was not discussed before. So let's talk about the frontal bone. So this is a forehead area. This area between the eyebrows, this is called glabella, and lateral to that you have the frontal sinuses. You also have the supraorbital margin and supraorbital foramen. That's part of the frontal bone. You have the nasal bone. There's two of them here. And you have the lacrimal bone, which is difficult to see in this view, but this is a good view to see. Lacrimal sulcus is around here, and this is the lacrimal bone. So you have the nasal bone, you have the maxilla, so this is called the frontal process of maxilla, and then you have the lacrimal bone, then you have the ethmoid. So the temporal bone, you have the zygomatic process. This articulates with the zygomatic bone. This whole area is called the zygomatic arch. The mastoid process, you can see is round. And the stylite process, you can see only part of it. And the external acoustic meatus, where sounds enter the ears. Maxilla, you have the infraorbital foramen. Alveolar processes, this is where teeth are inserted. So this view, frontal view, this is the side view, and this is the inferior or internal view. And the palatine process, so the hard palate, or the floor of the mouth, or the roof of the nasal cavity, all three of them are the same thing. And the anterior part of the hard palate is made by the palatine process of maxilla. This is the palatine bone, so this is not maxilla. Mandible is the lower jaw, so it's just one bone. Maxilla, there are two of them. Mandible, just one. So it has the same processes, alveolar processes here, because the teeth are inserted. So this is the anterior view. This is the lateral view. And here you can see the internal or inferior view. Mental process, so the chin area, mental process. Chronoid process, you can see it in the lateral view. This is the chronoid process, which is located anteriorly. Condylar is located posteriorly. In between the two, you have the mandibular notch. And this is the ramus. This is a big bony projection. And I hope you liked this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumb up. and try to subscribe to the channel because I will put more videos. If you have any questions, comments, please write it down. And thanks very much for watching. So see you next time.